Now, last time we met, Esther, she gets word from Mordecai what was taking place. And at the end of chapter 4, Mordecai tells her, you're going to have to go, right? You have to go for such time as this. You can place there. At the end of chapter 4, she agrees and she tells Mordecai, gather together all the Jews that are present, choose and fast for me, neither eat nor drink 3 days, night or day, and I and my maidens will also fast likewise. And so in chapter 5, verse 1, it says, now it came to pass on the 3rd day that Esther put on her royal apparel and stood in the inner court of the king's house, over against the king's house, and the king sat upon his royal throne in the royal house, over against the gate of the house. And it was so, when the king saw Esther, the queen standing in the court, that she obtained favor in his sight. And the king held out to Esther the golden scepter that was in his hand. And so Esther drew near and touched the top of the scepter. And then said the king unto her, what wilt thou, Queen Esther, and what is thy request? It shall be given thee even to half the kingdom. And Esther answered, if it seem good unto the king, let the king and Haman come this day to the banquet that I have prepared for him. And the king said, cause him to make haste, that he may do as Esther has said. And so the king and Haman came to the banquet that Esther had prepared. And the king said unto Esther at the banquet of wine, what is thy petition? And it shall be granted thee. And what is thy request? Even the half the kingdom it shall be performed. And then answered Esther and said, my petition and my request is, if I have found favor in thy sight of the king, and if it please the king to grant my petition and to perform my request, let the king and Haman come to the banquet that I shall prepare for them, and I will do tomorrow as the king said. And then went Haman forth that day, joyful and with a glad heart. But when Haman saw Mordecai in the king's gate, that he stood not up, nor moved for him, he was full of indignation against Mordecai. Nevertheless, Haman refrained himself, and when he came home, he sent and called for his friends and Zeresh his wife. And Haman told them the glory of his riches, and the multitude of his children, and all the things wherein the king had promoted him, and how he had advanced him above all the princes and servants of the king. Haman said, moreover, yea, Esther the queen did let no man come in with the king unto the banquet that she had prepared for myself, and tomorrow I am invited unto her also with the king. Yet all this availeth me nothing, so long as I see Mordecai the Jew sitting in the king's gate. And then said Zeresh his wife with all his friends, let a gallows be made of 50 cubits high, and tomorrow speak thou to the king that Mordecai may be hanged thereon. And then go thou merrily with the king to the banquet. And the thing pleased Haman, and he caused the gallows to be made. And so, as I said, there have been fasting, and as we talked about last week, the assumption is fasting and praying, right? Because fasting alone really doesn't accomplish anything. And so they're fasting and praying for 3 days, which Esther herself was involved with. And so after this particular time, the time had finally come for her to go face the king, find out her fate, right? We've talked about this. This was a capital offense. Had the king not held out that scepter, Esther, for everything we know, just historically speaking, she would have been put to death. But now, she's getting ready to do this. She does it in the right way. And so she prepares as best she could. And she does this spiritually and, as we see in verse 1, physically. She puts on the royal apparel, right? She adorns herself properly, but she does it again in the right order. And so she did the spiritual side first, again, with the assumption that prayer was taking place alongside of the fasting. And so again, in this we do see a good example, because whatever it is we may face, we should first approach it spiritually in prayer. And that really doesn't matter what it is. And that's not to say that we shouldn't be involved with the physical aspect of whatever answer may come. Again, she prepares herself physically. But she was first involved with the spiritual side of this. And I think this is, I guess I could say I know that this is something that a lot of Christians neglect. We neglect this particular aspect. We either don't go to God at all, we don't pray about issues at all, or it's the last thing that we do instead of the first thing that we do, or we only pray when we feel like we're backed into a corner, right? Whatever the case may be, when Scripture is fundamentally clear on this, that it ought to be absolutely the first thing we do. Paul tells the Thessalonians to not cease praying, right? We pray without ceasing. James 5:13 says, is any among you afflicted? What does it say? Let him pray. Right? Let him pray. Does that mean if you have issues, don't go to the doctor? Don't go seek problems to your... No, don't do, it's not saying don't do that. But it's saying the first thing you should do, the first thing you should be involved with is praying. Take this to God. Let the spiritual approach be the first approach. And again, I think that this is something that is so utterly neglected, and not just in our problems. We neglect going to God in praise. We neglect going to God, for any possible reason we might need to pray far too often. We don't do it enough. Nobody will go to heaven thinking, I prayed too much. I spent too much time praying, right? That's just never going to happen. And so she prepares. She prepares herself spiritually. She prepares herself, verse 1, physically. And now she approaches the king. And just, I didn't put this in the text, but you can see in verses 1 and 2 the detail that the author is given. The exact location where she's standing. The exact location of where the king is sitting. All of this gives credence to the fact that this is a literal historical account. Right? This is something we talked about way back in the introduction. A lot of people question this, but this is a literal historical account. The author is showing us that they have an intimate knowledge of the palace, an intimate knowledge of how things were laid out, where Esther would have been standing, all these things. It's almost blink and you miss it kind of thing, but we don't want to just completely overlook the fact that the author knows exactly what they're talking about, right? And then I think that's displayed quite well, particularly in verses 1 and 2. But she comes to the king. And as we've said all along, this seems so simple. Verses 1 and 2 doesn't spend a lot of time dwelling on this. It just tells us she's there, the king is on the throne, and then verse 2, he sees Esther, and then it says that she obtained favor, and so he extends the scepter. It's quick, it doesn't spend a lot of time on this, but her very presence there, that was enough. That was a capital offense had the king not extended the scepter. And so, we don't want to, again, overlook the fact that this took an amazing amount of courage. And not only that, but she's not done. She hasn't even made her request yet, right? This was just kind of step 1 of the plan. Step 1 of the plan, don't die. Step 2 of the plan, actually ask for help. And so, she's got that step out of the way. So I'm sure she was fearful. I'm sure there were a ton of things running through her mind, but she did it. I've told my kids this 100 times. Courage doesn't mean you're not afraid. Courage means you act even if you are afraid, right? And so Esther here displays a tremendous amount of courage. And so again, that was step 1. Well, what's step 2? Step 2 is getting the king on your side, getting the king to understand that you have just placed a death sentence on her along with her people. And so she's now found favor. Verse 2 tells us that very clearly. She has now found favor. Again, he's extended the scepter. And so he asks her, right, what can I do for you? And he tells her, I'll give you up to half the kingdom. Now, that probably wasn't a literal statement, but nevertheless it shows that the king is saying, with generalities, I'll do whatever you ask, right? That's basically what he's saying. Now, she doesn't ask. She doesn't come right out and say, here's what's going on. She says, I have this banquet prepared, and I want you and Haman to come to the banquet. Now, there's, I would say, at least 2 reasons that she does this. The text doesn't say. The text doesn't say, here's why she doesn't just ask the king. Here's why she prepared this banquet. We don't know. But I think there's at least 2 reasons that we can assume. Number 1, just on a practical note, she had already prepared this banquet. She says she asked him to come this day. In other words, I have a banquet prepared. Right? It's not something you just quickly throw together. And so it seems as if she had already prepared this as a way to gain favor, which is number 2. She wanted to gain as much favor with the king as she could. Right? She knows what she's going to ask is a significant thing. Right? This is not a small request that she's going to make of the king. And so she wants to garner as much favor. And also you have to understand, it's not as if her and the king have a very close, intimate relationship. Right? I mean, she is maybe the highest ranking of the concubines, but she's still one of many women who are one of the wives of the king. In fact, we saw it in the last chapter. One of the things she tells Mordecai, she said, I haven't seen him for 30 days. Right? And so, they don't have this very, very close relationship. He's not a stranger, obviously, but they're not very, very close to one another. So she wants to, for lack of a better phrase, she wants to butter him up, right? She wants to make sure, I want to put him in the best mood as I can possibly have him before making this request. And so they do this. They go to the banquet. He and Haman are there. And at the banquet, again, the king says, what do you want, right? what can I do for you? Gives her the same thing. I'll give you up to half kingdom. And so, again, she does not ask. She says, hey, I'm going to have another banquet tomorrow. And I want you and Haman to be there. I want you and Haman to be at this banquet. I'll prepare it for tomorrow, and then I will make my request known. Now, again, the text doesn't tell us why, but I thought this was interesting. This is a quote from Constance Gain, and she is an archaeologist who specializes in this particular time period and culture. And this is what she says, quote, according to ancient Near Eastern etiquette, delay in making one's request signaled its importance. Food and especially wine were important precursors for making a weighty request. An invitation to a second banquet heightened the seriousness of the situation. Now again, we can't say that that's why. This is just the opinion of this archaeologist. I think it's an informed opinion, but nevertheless, if it's true, basically by saying, hey, banquet number 2 shows you how serious I am. Banquet number 2 shows you how serious of an issue I need to approach you with. Again, I think that's likely. Obviously, I can't say this is why, but I think that's likely. Now, what is interesting is no matter the exact reason, and again, Scripture doesn't tell us, but whatever the exact reason, we'll see this in the next chapter, God is going to use this particular delay. The fact that she does not ask here, and the fact that she puts it off one day, and the banquet is when she makes her approach, is going to be kind of the key to God's deliverance here. And we'll see that in the next chapter, how that unfolds, and it's very interesting, very fascinating. But this was another instance of God's providence moving. Probably nobody thought, the fact that Esther didn't ask at banquet 1, decided to ask at banquet 2, this is God providentially moving. But then we have the Scriptures come along, and the author, writing through the inspiration of the Spirit, shows us, without saying it out loud, that this was God moving. Right? That this was God's providence at play. I like what Spurgeon said. He said, doubtless she longed to bring out her secret, but the words came not. God was in it. It was not the right time to speak, and therefore she was led to put off her disclosure. Right? She might not even have known the exact reason why the first banquet was not the right time. And so, that's where we leave kind of Esther's side of it. Another banquet to come with Ahasuerus and Haman. And then the end of the chapter shows us Haman's side of this. And so verse 9 says, then went Haman forth that day joyful, right? Glad heart. But when Haman saw Mordecai in the king's gate, that he stood not up nor moved for him, he was full of indignation against Mordecai. Now, the end of chapter 5 here gives us what I think is probably the best look at Haman. The best look at why he is kind of the man that he is, why he has this bitterness and everything that's going on. And so Haman leaves the banquet, again, joyful. I mean, verse 9 tells us as much, right? And there's no reason for him not to be. We'll talk about this in a second. He had everything going for him, right? Everything was going well. But then at the end of verse 9, he just has this one, to use kind of Paul's phrase, he has this one thorn in the flesh, right? He has this one little issue with Mordecai. Now, just as a note here, earlier, at the end of chapter 3, Haman gets mad because Mordecai won't bow. Right? And then this time, Haman gets mad because he won't stand. Right? Which shows us that it wasn't the bowing. Right? That's not what Mordecai was mad about. It wasn't the bowing aspect of it. There were other things going on, which I'll rehash on that. We're going to talk about that. But here, he stood not up nor moved for him. And I thought this was interesting. The word moved, the word itself means to tremble. To tremble. And so apparently, what was taking place is the group of people that Haman was walking by start to tremble before Haman. More than likely, again, I can't dogmatically say, but more than likely, putting on a show, right? Putting on a show for Haman to appease this man's ego. We've already seen how that's kind of something that was taking place in Persia. But Mordecai wouldn't do it, right? Mordecai refused to do this. First of all, I won't bow. Now I'm not going to stand and shake and act like you're this big power over me. I'm just not going to do it. Haman could not leave well enough alone. Again, he had risen to the highest positions in the biggest kingdom in the world. Right? We're not talking about a small kingdom. We're talking about the kingdom of Persia at a time when it kind of ruled everything. And so he's at one of the highest positions he could be in the biggest kingdom in the world. He tells his family about all his riches. He's wealthy. He has a large family. He's as successful as one could be at that particular time, with the fact that the king gives him his ring in order to seal the proclamation that he wrote. Right? He clearly has the ear of the king. He's got literally everything possible going for him, but for Mordecai. Right? It's just that one thing. He could not let the actions of that one man go. I like what Yuzik, he said, miserable Haman, honored by both the king and queen of Persia. We've talked about this several times in the past. There have been all kinds of studies and research done upon people who are ultra rich. And almost every single time, they are never satisfied. They're just not satisfied with it. Right? They can have all the money in the world, and it's not enough. Right? I think it's Elon Musk now who just passed over the trillion mark. Right? He's a trillionaire now. At least that's what they're saying. But somebody like that, even they keep going, they keep pushing. Why? Because there's something there that they don't have, and they think it's going to be found in money, in success, in prestige, in power, in notoriety, whatever the case may be. Haman is one of these men. Right? He's got everything. He's got the family, the money, the power, the influence. He has it all. People are literally, again, I think probably pretending, but people are trembling as he walks by him. But that one guy doesn't do it. That one guy won't do it. And that was enough for him to say, none of this satisfies me. I find no fulfillment in none of this. And so Haman thought he had a problem with Mordecai, but the problem was with his own heart. Right? And this is the issue with, not just Haman, this is the issue with literally every human being, where we all have an issue. And the issue is, we don't have a relationship with God. And that is the issue. That is the thing that people are trying to find fulfillment. Some of them, at least, don't recognize that that's the problem, that that's what they're searching for. And they try to find fulfillment in all manner of things, but they're not going to ever find it until they come into a relationship with God. I like what Clark said. He said, the soul was made for God, and nothing but God can fill it and make it happy. Right? And that is the essence of the problem that so many people are searching. They know they have a problem, but they don't really know what the problem is. That's the problem. Right? You need a relationship with your Creator. And so Haman was searching for joy in the praise and in the reverence of men, but the only place to truly find joy is, again, with the relationship and the presence of God. Jesus said in John 15, he says, these things have I spoken unto you, that my joy might remain in you, and that your joy might be full. Your joy might be full. Now listen, if you have a relationship with Christ and your joy is full, guess what? You're not going to find fulfillment in. You're not going to go find fulfillment in all these other things. You're not going to find fulfillment in all the entrapments of the world. You're going to find fulfillment where you're supposed to find it, in a relationship with your Creator. And then the chapter ends with a small kind of preview of what's coming, although, again, it's another surprise that we're going to see later on. But on the counsel of his wife, which kind of shows you he's also surrounding himself with the wrong people. But on the counsel of his wife and his friends, he decides to build a 75-foot tall gallows. That would be the 50 cubits there, verse 14. Now, to kind of explain this a little bit, when we, in the West, we hear gallows and we have a very distinct picture in mind. That's most likely not what this was. It would have been, the word there translates gallows, but it's a different kind of thing, a different kind of instrument. The word just means tree or beam of wood. In fact, that's how it's translated most of the time. In fact, of all the times, and I forget how many it is now, many times this word is used in the Old Testament. Esther is the only time it's translated gallows. But that is the proper translation for it. We just have a misunderstanding when we hear that term. And so the height of it gives us a little bit of a clue. If you're building a gallows, you don't build it 75 feet in the air. And so the Persians, not to get too graphic, and I'm trying to not make it too graphic tonight, but the Persians' preferred method of public execution was not hanging from a gallows, but was impalement. And so the beam of wood, where it didn't have a rope hanging from it that you would hang someone on it, he was impaled upon it. That's what the gallows was. And it was done this way, particularly if it was this high, The reason was not just that it would kill the individual, but that it would publicly shame them and humiliate them. Right? That's why you would have it 75 feet high. And so that's what Haman is trying to do. Haman wants to use the normal Persian means of public execution to absolutely ridicule and humiliate and shame this man that he can't let go. He can't forget about this one small, not to be rude, insignificant problem. Right? You think about all the things going on in Haman's life. Does Mordecai really matter? No. But it does to him. He can't let it go. And so the plan was for Mordecai to be hanged upon this. And they use the word hang there in a similar manner to how it's used in the New Testament. A couple times in the New Testament they talk about Jesus being hanged on a tree. Well, again, he wasn't hung from it. He was pierced to it. Right? And so it was kind of used in a similar manner as that. And so he would be hanged, impaled upon this beam 75 feet in the air. At least that was the plan, right? That was the plan. Now, this horrifying instrument of death, prepared by Haman for Mordecai, was actually going to be used by God to fulfill God's purpose. Of course, I know you know the story, but I won't get ahead. We'll see that as we go. Frederick Bush, I'll close with this quote. He said, Haman's plans are about to run head on into the providence of God. And so we'll see again how God was moving. Even though it's never stated unequivocally, but we know and can see it obviously that God was moving in the book of Esther. Okay.